In the bustling heart of Lagos, where neon lights danced above crowded streets and the aroma of jollof rice, roasted plantain, and suya smoke clung to the humid night air, there stood the Ebony Crest Lounge, a place as exclusive as a king's court and as guarded as the sacred shrines of Ife. And it was here that fate sharpened its knife, not with whispers of the market, nor with drums of a festival, but with words so heavy they silenced even the hum of wealth. "We don't serve people like you here." The insult cut across the air like a masquerade's whip snapping in the dark, and instantly the room, filled with a rustle of silk agbadas and the clink of golden bracelets, froze into stillness, as though the ancestors themselves had placed a hand upon every tongue. At the center stood a man, mid-40s, tall, dignified, dressed in a fine charcoal kaftan woven with northern embroidery, his salt and pepper hair glinting under chandeliers imported from Dubai. But though his mouth did not open, his hand spoke with graceful authority, shaping signs that carried the rhythm of Yoruba bata drums, a language older than most in the room could comprehend, yet filled with dignity. His name, though unspoken yet, was Chief Adewale, a wealthy philanthropist and tech magnate who had built schools in Osun and funded clinics across Ghana. But in this moment he was not a man of status. He was merely a deaf African standing in the face of arrogant scorn. And watching him was a young waitress, Abena Mensah, 25, her dark skin glowing like fresh palm oil beneath soft chandelier light, her posture balanced with the quiet dignity of generations who endure, her name tag crooked from hours of rushing between tables, serving pepper soup in bottles of imported champagne. Born in Kumasi but raised in the bustling quarters of Accra, Abena had learned long ago that the world judges a woman before she speaks, and so when she did, she made sure it counted. But more importantly, she had learned to listen with her eyes. As a girl, she spent endless afternoons with her neighbor Kwame, a deaf boy shunned by other children, teaching herself to sign from worn library books and borrowed videotapes. Her fingers clumsy at first, but soon flowing like the Volta River. Now, in the glittering heart of Lagos nightlife, those forgotten lessons stirred awake, as though the ancestors had prepared her for this night. The manager of the lounge, swollen with arrogance, sneered and mocked both Adewale and the young waitress who dared to respond to him. But arrogance, griots say, is the seed of downfall, and humility is the path of true power. Instead of bowing her head or retreating into silence, Abena lifted her hands, her fingers moving like the dancers of an airway festival, her signs flowing with such elegance that the entire room fell into reverent quiet, their disbelief transforming into awe. It was no longer a transaction of service, it was an act of recognition, a declaration that no man is invisible. And as she signed, Adewale's eyes brightened, relief softening the weight he carried, while whispers moved through the room like harmattan wind, rustling cloth and tilting heads. What no one knew was that two others were watching. Seated at the far end of the lounge, beneath the carved wooden mask imported from Benin, was Madame Ifunanya Okonkwo, the powerful CEO of the Ebony Crest Empire, her emerald wrapper glittering like rain-washed leaves under moonlight, her face unreadable but her eyes sharp, every detail absorbed like a hawk circling over prey. And in the corner, a man dressed simply in white Senegalese bubu, with the quiet presence of one used to being underestimated, observed with unshaken interest. His name was Kofi Boateng, a millionaire investor from Accra, whose reputation for funding African innovation was whispered in boardrooms from Dakar to Johannesburg. These two carried the unseen power of the night, and though Abena did not know it, her act of defiance and compassion had already set a fire that would not be extinguished. The griot's voice would say, when a woman lifts her hands to defend the dignity of another, she summons spirits stronger than any sword. And in that glittering hall in Lagos, with eyes and ancestors alike bearing witness, Abena Mensah unknowingly stepped into a trial that would test arrogance, unveil hidden truths, and lead to a proposal so unexpected it would leave her spirit trembling with both fear and joy.
Long before the chandeliers of Lagos glared down on Abena Mensah, her story was written on the red earth roads of Kumasi, where plantain leaves rustled in the wind, and children's laughter echoed like drums across the courtyards. And it was here that she learned the meaning of seeing those the world refused to see. Her father, Kwaku Mensah, a devoted primary school teacher, spent evenings marking books by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, while her mother, Ajwo, a nurse in a crowded clinic, returned home weary but firm, always reminding her daughter, "Abena, the world will name you before you speak, so when your voice is called, let it carry weight." But it wasn't her parents alone who shaped her. It was her neighbor, old Madame Isi, who often kept her grandson Kwame, a boy whose silence was not born of shyness, but of a world he could not hear. Other children avoided him, whispering that he was cursed by the gods, some even mocking him with cruel gestures. Yet Abena, drawn by something deeper, sat beside him on the porch steps each afternoon, her eyes fixed on the graceful flutter of his hands as he tried to communicate. She didn't understand at first, but she watched, patient as the river waiting for the rains. Then one day, determined not to let him remain alone, she borrowed a book from the small library near Kejetia Market, an old, tattered guide to American Sign Language. Page after page, she traced the letters, copying them with clumsy fingers until they began to flow with rhythm. Grainy videotapes followed, borrowed from a church group in Accra that worked with deaf children. She would rewind them late into the night, repeating motions until her arms ached. Slowly, she became fluent, not because anyone demanded it, but because her spirit whispered that no child should live unseen. By the time she was 15, she could hold conversations with Kwame, asking if the rains had spoiled his mother's yam harvest, if he wanted to play football, or if he liked the bright blue sandals she had bought at the market. Those moments taught her that true listening does not come only through ears, but through heart and eyes, and that kindness is not charity, but recognition. Years later, when her parents sent her to Accra for work to help pay her younger siblings' school fees, those lessons followed her like ancestors walking beside her shadow. She worked long shifts in markets, carried baskets for traders, then found employment as a waitress in one of the city's fast-rising hotels, balancing trays heavier than her frame, but always carrying her dignity with quiet grace. Life in Accra was not easy. The streets were loud with trotro horns. Landlords demanded rent with no mercy. And city life constantly reminded her she was just another young woman trying to survive. But deep inside, Abena was studying online, taking courses in special education, dreaming of one day opening a center for children like Kwame across Ghana and Nigeria, a place where silence would never be misunderstood for invisibility. That dream, tucked away in notebooks and late-night prayers, was what gave her the strength to endure customers who shouted for no reason, managers who dismissed her ideas, and nights when her back screamed from carrying too much. By the time she was 25, she had moved to Lagos, Nigeria, where opportunity was said to flow like the Niger River itself. She found work at the Ebony Crest Lounge, a place of shimmering wealth and choking arrogance, where political figures feasted beside entertainers, and where waitresses like her were invisible until needed. Yet she remained unbroken, because she carried her parents' discipline, her mother's fire, her father's patience, and Kwame's silent resilience. Folktales teach that what is planted in childhood will grow when destiny calls. And so it was with Abena. For when Chief Adewale stood at that hostess stand ignored and mocked, her heart did not see a stranger. It saw Kwame on the porch, hands fluttering in desperation, waiting for someone to answer. And in that recognition, she found her courage, not because she craved attention or reward, but because she could not allow dignity to be trampled while she remained still. The griot's voice would say, "When the river remembers the rains of its youth, it flows with greater strength." And Abena, remembering every afternoon of patience, carried that strength into the glittering halls of Lagos, where her empathy would soon shake an empire.
When the doors of the Ebony Crest Lounge opened that evening, and Chief Adewale stepped inside, it was as though a quiet storm entered with him, the kind that bends trees without breaking them, the kind that announces itself not with thunder, but with presence. He wore a tailored charcoal caftan embroidered with northern Hausa patterns, his posture tall, his eyes kind yet weary, and his hair streaked with silver like the wisdom of an elder whose life had crossed many rivers. To most of the patrons, he was just another wealthy man, another chief from Ogun or Lagos, another figure of influence to be tolerated or flattered, depending on the occasion. But those who knew his story whispered otherwise. They whispered of the schools he had built in Osun, the clinics he funded in Kumasi, the scholarships he provided in Dakar, and the silent vow he carried to make Africa's future brighter for those overlooked. But tonight, in this glittering lounge filled with governors' sons, Nollywood stars, and business magnates, his identity was reduced to something the arrogant staff could mock: his silence. For when he reached the hostess stand, he did not speak. Instead, his hands began to move with calm precision, shaping words in the graceful arcs of sign language. "Good evening," he signed. "A table for one, please." The hostess blinked, confused, her eyes darting nervously toward the bar where two waiters whispered with mocking smiles, one muttering, "Another special case." The manager, Marcus Okoro, folded his arms and muttered disdainfully, "This is not a school for the disabled. Why did he even come here?" The arrogance dripped like palm wine left too long in the sun. Yet Chief Adewale did not lose his composure. He stood firm, his dignity unshaken, repeating his request with the patience of a man who had faced this dismissal too many times before. It was in that moment that Abena Mensah, weaving between tables with a tray of pepper soup balanced on one hand, felt the shift in the air, the kind of shift only those attuned to suffering notice. Her eyes found Adewale instantly, her memory pulling her back to Kwame, her childhood neighbor, who had worn the same expression, an expression not of anger, but of disappointment at a world that refused to meet him halfway. Without hesitation, she set down her tray, straightened her apron, and walked toward the hostess stand, her movements calm yet determined, as though guided by unseen drums. She approached from Adewale's side so he could see her clearly, then lifted her hands and signed with confidence of one who had carried this language in her heart for years. "Good evening, Chief. May I help you?" Adewale's eyes lit up, the heaviness of solitude melting into relief. He signed back quickly, his hands alive with gratitude. "Thank you, my daughter. I feared no one here would understand." Their conversation unfolded like music, fluid and unhurried, and the room, filled with those who prided themselves on power, could only watch in stunned silence. Abena asked whether he preferred a seat by the window where it was quiet or near the stage where music played, and he signed back that he wanted peace after a long day of meetings. She smiled softly, guiding him toward a corner table reserved for VIPs, her hands moving like the graceful dancers of an Ewe festival, bridging worlds with every motion. Guests turned to watch. Some whispered admiration, others concealed discomfort, but all felt the undeniable gravity of what was happening. At the far end of the lounge, Madame Ifunanya Okonkwo, CEO of the Ebony Crest Empire, observed every detail from behind a carved Benin mask. her eyes narrowing not in scorn, but in recognition. She had seen staff rise and fall, managers boast and crumble, but rarely had she witnessed compassion practiced so boldly in public. And in the shadowed corner near the wine rack, Kofi Boakeng, the Ghanaian millionaire investor whose decisions could shape entire industries, leaned forward in quiet fascination. He had come only for a business dinner, yet here was a waitress reshaping the definition of service, not with words, but with empathy. For the griot would say, a woman who sees with her heart can silence a room of kings. And indeed, that night, as Abena signed to Chief Adewale under the glittering chandeliers of Lagos, the Ebony Crest Lounge fell silent, not because power demanded it, but because kindness had made silence the only fitting response.
The hush that had settled over the Ebony Crest Lounge did not last long, for arrogance is like a restless drum, always eager to beat louder than wisdom. And soon Marcus Okoro, the assistant manager, whose pride was bigger than his service, stepped forward with eyes narrowed like blades and words dipped in venom. He called her name sharply, "Abena, come here now," his voice slicing through the soft hum of conversations like a machete through ripe cassava. The guests turned, forks paused, whispers rose like the rustle of palm fronds before a storm, and Abena, though her heart trembled, walked toward him with the same quiet grace that had carried her since childhood. Chief Adewale watched, his brow furrowed, his eyes reading the tension though he could not hear the words, and Kofi Boateng, from his shadowed corner, leaned in, sensing the test about to unfold. Marcus folded his arms and hissed under his breath, but loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "What nonsense is this, Abena? You are a waitress, not a performer. This is not a classroom for the deaf. You have embarrassed this lounge." Abena blinked, stunned but steady, her hands clenched lightly at her side, her voice calm as she replied, "I was helping a guest. He needed understanding, and I gave it." But Marcus was not done. Arrogance never concedes easily. His lips curled, and he spat out words heavy with scorn. "Do not turn this into some pity story about a black girl who thinks she is special. You are replaceable." The insult struck the air like thunder, drawing sharp breaths from guests who had never seen humiliation delivered so publicly. A couple dressed in Ankara finery whispered behind their hands. A busboy froze mid-step with a tray of drinks, and the hostess shrank behind her stand, pale as chalk. Chief Adewale stood slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes piercing, his hands twitching as if to sign what his voice could not thunder. That dignity was not a thing to be thrown away. Yet Abena held her ground, her voice soft but carrying the weight of truth. "Service means seeing people, Marcus. You missed that part." Her words, though simple, landed heavier than his scorn, and the lounge itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, like a lioness stepping from the tall grass, Madame Ifunanya Okonkwo moved forward from her quiet place by the carved mask, her emerald wrapper catching the light, her stride steady, her gaze sharp as a spear. The room shifted instantly. Even the waiters who had smirked now stood rigid, for when the CEO of Ebony Crest spoke, it was as if the ancestors themselves demanded attention. "Actually," she said, her voice low but lethal, "she is not replaceable." Marcus spun around, his face draining of color, stammering, Madame Okonkwo, I did not know you were here." She fixed him with a gaze that pierced deeper than any whip. "I know you did not. That is why you allowed your arrogance to reveal itself. I have watched everything, from the moment Chief Adewale entered to the moment you mocked my staff for doing the right thing. You have embarrassed my brand, not her. You have mocked a guest who carries more dignity in silence than you in all your words. And worst of all, you believed no one important was watching. Marcus opened his mouth to defend himself, but she raised one hand, silencing him like an elder silences a quarrelsome child. Save it. Your position is terminated, effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the hall like waves. Marcus sputtered, his face flushed with shame, but security staff appeared like shadows at her signal, and the man who moments ago believed himself powerful was escorted out, his pride crumbling with every step. Madame Okonkwo turned to Abena then, her tone softening like morning light after a storm. You reminded us all what service means, my daughter. You reminded me why I built this company in the first place. She turned to Adewale, her hands lifting with surprising elegance as she signed clearly, "Thank you for your patience. We failed you tonight, but it ends here." Chief Adewale's eyes softened, gratitude replacing his earlier disappointment, while Kofi Boateng leaned back in his chair, a smile curving across his face, for he knew that the seeds of transformation had been planted. And so the griot would say, "When arrogance shouts, humility need not answer with noise, only with truth, for truth will summon justice to its side." That night in Lagos, in the glittering Ebony Crest Lounge, justice arrived dressed in emerald, and its roar was heard in silence.
The morning sun rose over Lagos like a golden drumbeat, striking the glass towers of Victoria Island until they gleamed as though set aflame, and Abena Mensah, dressed in her best blouse, one she usually reserved for interviews in church, walked nervously into the corporate headquarters of Ebony Crest, her heart thundering louder than the Danfo buses racing below. She had hardly slept, her mind replaying Marcus's venom, Madame Ifunanya Okonkwo's quiet defense, and the piercing eyes of Chief Adewale as he watched everything unfold. Now, escorted past marble floors and glass-paneled offices, she was brought into a room high above the city, a room filled with light and silence, where Madame Okonkwo herself stood by the window, wrapped in emerald and gold like an empress surveying her kingdom. "You showed up," she said simply, her voice calm yet commanding. "That tells me more than words could." Abena bowed her head slightly, unsure of what to say, but Madame Okonkwo gestured for her to sit. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of rivers and the fire of storms, she told her own story. "I grew up in Onitsha, raised by a widowed mother who worked in the markets. My younger sister, Nanana, was deaf, bright as the morning star, but ignored by teachers, mocked by traders, and left behind by the world. I swore then that if I built something of my own, no one under my roof would feel unseen. Last night, I saw myself in you." She leaned forward, her eyes steady. "I am offering you more than praise, Abena. I am offering you a future, a position as Director of Inclusive Guest Experience, title, team, resources, and a scholarship to finish your studies in special education. Your work will not end at one lounge. It will shape the whole empire." Abena's breath caught in her throat, tears pressing hot against her eyes, for she had expected a reprimand, perhaps a dismissal, never a chance like this. And yet, before she could respond, another presence entered the room. Chief Adewale himself, tall, dignified, carrying with him the silence that spoke volumes, followed by a man in flowing white bubu, his smile quiet but knowing. Kofi Boateng, the Ghanaian millionaire whose reputation stretched from Accra's Makola market to Nairobi's boardrooms. Adewale signed to Abena with deliberate grace. "Last night was not an accident. I came not only to eat, but to observe. I am working on a foundation, funds dedicated to accessibility, technology, and education for the deaf across Africa.
But foundations need leaders with courage, not just money. I want you to join us to help guide this vision." Kofi nodded, adding in a soft but firm voice, "And I will stand beside you both with capital and influence. You do not need me to lead, Abena. You already lead. What you need is for us to open the gates so your steps carry further." Abena sat frozen, her heart clashing between disbelief and destiny. Two invitations, one from the most powerful woman in Nigerian hospitality, the other from men who had the wealth to shift entire systems. She thought of her parents in Kumasi, of her mother's warning that the world would judge her before she spoke, of Kwame on the porch, patient hands fluttering in silence, of every insult endured, every night shift survived, every dream scribbled in notebooks by candlelight. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "Why me?" Adewale signed with gentle precision, "Because you did what others feared. You saw me." Madame Okonkwo's eyes softened, "And you reminded me of why I built all this." Kofi smiled, folding his hands like a man sealing a pact. "The ancestors choose their vessels. Today, they chose you." And so the griot would say, "When the river of destiny overflows, the humble will not drown. They will learn to swim, and in swimming, they will carry others to shore." In that high office above Lagos, Abena's life shifted from survival to purpose, and though she did not yet understand the fullness of it, she knew one truth. She had been invited to sit at tables she never dreamed of reaching, not to be silent, but to change the menu itself.
No great fire burns in silence, for when word of the Ebony Crest confrontation escaped into the streets of Lagos, it spread like dry harmattan wind, fanning embers, catching first on small tongues of gossip in Balagoon Market, then leaping to radio talk shows in Abuja, until within days it became a blaze across Africa's digital town squares. Twitter threads, WhatsApp groups, and TikTok clips shared in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. The video was simple yet powerful. Abena signing with Chief Adewale, Marcus hissing with arrogance, Madame Ifunanya Okonkwo stepping forward like a lioness, cutting him down with words sharper than any spear. At first, the comments were filled with praise. This is what Africa needs. Kindness is leadership. Finally, dignity wins. But soon, as always, the shadows came creeping. Trolls behind faceless avatars snarled accusations, calling Abena a fraud, a staged actress, a diversity token. Anonymous blogs claimed she had fabricated her resume, inflated her studies, even that Chief Adewale was no real guest, but an actor planted for a publicity stunt. An old classmate from Accra dug up memories, twisting them into lies that she was manipulative. Others posted her photos, dissecting her smile, her posture, her dress, as though her existence was an exhibition to be judged. By the third day, the noise was so loud it threatened to drown her spirit. Abena sat in her small rented room in Surulere, curtains drawn, her phone buzzing with venom, her hands trembling as she whispered to herself, "Perhaps I should step down. Perhaps I am not strong enough for this." The next morning, Madame Okonkwo summoned her. The CEO's office was calm as always, sunlight spilling across marble, the city's noise muffled by thick glass. "You wish to resign?" Ifunanya asked, her gaze unwavering. Abena lowered her eyes. "The attacks are heavy. They're saying I lied." Madame Okonkwo leaned forward, her voice firm as the Akan drum. "Tell me, did you help Chief Adewale because you thought anyone would see it?" "No." "Did you know I was watching?" "No." "Did you expect reward?" "Of course not." "Then the rest," she said, her tone softening like evening rain, "is noise." She pulled open a drawer and placed a folder before Abena. Inside were letters, some typed, some scribbled, some written in the shaky hand of children. One was from a deaf girl in Ibadan who had seen the video and whispered, "Now I know I can dream." Another from a mother in Accra, thanking her because her son finally believed restaurants could be safe for him. Dozens of voices, from Kenya to Senegal, each one affirming that her small act had made them feel seen. Abena's tears spilled freely as she pressed the letters to her chest. And then, on her phone, a message arrived from Chief Adewale himself. Just a single emoji, the hand sign for "Thank you," followed by Kofi Boateng's text, "Let the trolls make noise. We will build, stone by stone, policy by policy, school by school." The griot would say, "The river does not argue with stones. It simply flows around them and continues to the sea." So Abena chose not to wrestle with the shadows, but to return to her work, training staff at dawn, drafting policies by dusk, visiting deaf schools on weekends. The trolls demanded collapse, but what they saw instead was multiplication. Ebony Crest introducing visual menus, interpreters on call, new staff pathways for those long ignored. The noise still hissed, but it was background now, drowned beneath the steady rhythm of change. And though her spirit bore scars, Abena's resolve became iron, for she remembered her mother's words, "The world will judge you before you speak, so when you do, let it count." And this time, she knew, her voice was not hers alone. It carried a generation.
By the time the new Ebony Crest Inclusive Wing opened on Victoria Island, the city of Lagos thrummed with anticipation, as though the ancestors themselves had sent whispers through the wind that history was about to be written in marble and light. The renovated space shimmered with details never before seen in such a luxurious hall. Menus etched with braille, digital tablets offering sign language videos beside each dish, soft lighting designed for comfort, and interpreters stationed not in corners as ornaments, but at the very heart of service. Guests flooded the space, politicians from Abuja, educators from Accra, disability advocates from Nairobi, journalists from Cape Town, all gathered to witness what many called a revolution in African hospitality. At the center stood Abena Mensah, wrapped in a deep emerald blazer that mirrored the pride of her people, her head held high, her eyes steady, her hands calm though her spirit raced. Madam Ifunanya Okonkwo stood at her side like a lioness watching over her cub, and Chief Adewale sat in the front row with his mother beside him, her aged face shining with tears of pride. Yet it was the quiet figure in a white Senegalese bubu near the corner, Kofi Boateng, who carried the secret that would turn admiration into astonishment. When the speeches ended and the ribbon fell to thunderous applause, Kofi gestured toward the rooftop garden above the hall, and Abena, though still trembling with disbelief at all she had achieved, followed him into the open air. Lagos stretched before them, the lagoon shimmering like molten bronze under the setting sun, the hum of traffic rising like distant drums. For a long moment, Kofi said nothing, only watching the horizon, before turning to her with eyes that carried the weight of both business and destiny. Slowly he signed with deliberate grace, though his voice followed softly. "The night you stood for Chief Adewale, you thought it was only an act of kindness, but it was a test, Abena, a test of character in a world that rewards silence. You passed, not for yourself, but for us all." She blinked, unsure, as he reached into the folds of his bubu and brought forth a small velvet box, the kind that contained more than wealth. It contained promises. "I came to Lagos only as an investor, to see if this initiative could be worth my capital. But what I saw was more than business. I saw leadership clothed in humility, courage carried in silence, and love for a people who deserve to be seen. Abena Mensah, I do not need you to complete me. You are already whole. when I ask you to join your path with mine so that together we may build a life and a legacy that refuses to erase anyone. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to tilt. The lagoon shimmered brighter. The wind rushed louder. Her heart thundered harder. Tears welled, unbidden, as memories crashed over her. Kwame on the porch with fluttering hands. Her father's voice by a kerosene lamp. Her mother's strength after endless shifts. Madame Okonkwo's unwavering defense. Chief Adewale's relief at being seen. All of it converged into this single moment where love and destiny met. Her laughter broke through tears as she signed with trembling hands, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." From below, the applause of the still-gathered guests floated upward, for some had witnessed from the balcony, and even Madame Okonkwo herself stood there, smiling knowingly like an elder watching prophecy fulfilled. Chief Adewale raised his hand in blessing, signing, "May your union be strength." And the griot would say, "When a woman of courage and a man of vision join paths, the ancestors rejoice, for together they will build roads wide enough for generations to walk upon." On that Lagos rooftop, as the sun sank into the horizon and two lives became one promise, Abena's journey crossed into a new chapter, not just of leadership, but of love that would anchor her destiny.
Months passed, and the tale of Abena Mensah became more than a story whispered in lounges or carried in headlines. It became a lesson sung across Africa, from the markets of Accra to the streets of Nairobi, from the mosques of Kano to the churches of Cape Coast. The Ebony Crest Inclusive Initiative grew roots deeper than anyone expected. Menus in Braille became common. Staff across Nigeria were trained in sign language, and even small chop bars in Kumasi began placing simple visual signs by their food counters, inspired by the changes they saw. Abena, now both wife and leader, carried her role with humility, walking between the boardrooms of Lagos and the classrooms of deaf schools in Ibadan, between conferences in Johannesburg and grassroots gatherings in Tamale, always reminding herself that leadership was not about loudness, but about seeing the unseen. Her marriage to Kofi Boateng was celebrated like a festival. Drummers lined the streets, masquerades danced in colorful regalia, and griots recited verses of how a waitress had become a queen of purpose through kindness and courage. Even Chief Adewale stood at the ceremony, tears in his eyes as he signed blessings over the couple, while Madame Ifunanya Okonkwo, draped in royal green, declared before all, "This is not just a union of two hearts, it is a covenant with our people, a promise that no African child shall grow believing they are invisible." Yet even as joy swelled, challenges came. Critics still whispered, trolls still muttered, but like harmattan dust swept by the first rains, their noise could not bury the truth of what was being built. Abena herself never forgot the porch in Kumasi, Kwame's hands fluttering like restless birds, the loneliness in his eyes that had once broken her heart. And each time she visited a school, each time a deaf child smiled in recognition, she felt that memory heal. For the griot would say, "A river does not drink its own water, and the tree does not eat its own fruit. What we are given is for others." And so Abena lived by that proverb, pouring her victories into the soil of her people. She saw it in the waitress in Abuja, who now greeted deaf guests with simple signs, in the Ghanaian mother, who wrote to say her daughter dreamed of managing hotels, in the Kenyan youth who emailed her saying, "Because of you, I believe kindness can lead." And in her own reflection, she no longer saw the invisible girl serving tables, but a leader chosen not by birth or wealth, but by the courage to act when silence was demanded of her. The story closed not with riches alone or titles that glitter, but with a moral as old as Africa itself, that kindness, when married to courage, can dismantle arrogance, elevate the forgotten, and carve a place where dignity thrives. And so the griot ends with this proverb: a proud heart may build a house of stone, but only humility can build a village. And the question is left to the listeners beneath the firelight. Do you believe Abena deserved the blessings she received, or should the spirits have tested her more? Answer in your heart, for in every story the final judgment belongs not to the teller, but to the people who carry its truth into tomorrow.
And so, my people, remember this: a proud heart may build a house of stone, but only humility can build a village. Do you believe Abena truly deserved the blessing she received, or should the spirits have tested her more? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this tale moved you, subscribe for more African folk tales told under the firelight of tradition.